So this question is about, does constant exposure make consultants seem common or less exclusive, reducing the sort of pull or magnetism of their expertise? Because you can find it anywhere, you can get it anywhere. They are everywhere.
Does being on podcasts enhance authority or dilute your brand? Should you worry about what your podcast is called? Why would you bother having your podcast if you could just be a guest on other people's? I answer these questions and more in this episode. Welcome to Not Another Business Podcast with me, Toby Goodman. My guest today is Kymberlee Medina, and before she became Coach Kym, she cut her teeth as a dancer, a choreographer, becoming a brand ambassador and advisor to Nike, along with building and selling her own agency. Kym and I have been in each other's corner for a few years now, and lately she's been thinking about starting a podcast for her new Power Player Club. Before we get started, if you identify as pod curious or you're just not getting the results you'd hoped for from your business podcast, you'll find my short video, Get Clients with Your Podcast, where I use a duck to explain how I went from musician to getting hired by leaders in education, healthcare and the space industry to improve their communication in business so that they can grow and sustain it. You can find that over at narrowpodcasting.com. We've had really cool chats about maybe starting a podcast, maybe not starting a podcast. What order? Is it website? Is it book? Is it clients? Is it like what happens? Where does a podcast fit? Like the idea of doing a podcast. Tell me where you are now and tell me what questions you have around your podcast at the moment.
All right. Firstly, thanks for doing this, Toby, because it's always fantastic to be able to sit and have a chat with you. So I am on the cusp, officially launching Project Power Player. Currently working with a few very select clients in beta to test my Power Player theories. And so far, the results are this world. So I'm excited about Project Power Player as an offering. I'm excited as a Project Power Player to be a continued project for me, so a focus for me and going all in on this. And of course, when we talked last, we talked about this idea of, Kym, when you're thinking about your visibility and you're thinking about where you're showing up, podcasts is a great way to do that. And of course, my initial questions were very logistical, I think, and mechanical. Okay, how do we put things together? I've had a think. Now that you've said to me, Kym, my brain is open, come inside. I'm like, you might regret saying that because I've got some really good questions for you.
I'll be the judge of that.
All right. All right. First question. All right, let's kick it off. First question. Do you think that the sort of typical personal brand approach that tons of, say, consultants, coaches, advisory-based business owners use or tend to portray on podcasts actually enhances their authority? Because ultimately that's what we want for a podcast to do, right? Or do you think it dilutes them because it makes them more accessible in a sense? So podcasting it's a way for you to show more of who you are and to be able to share more of who you are beyond a blog post, beyond that sort of thing. There's more of you appearing in it and available in it. Is that something that enhances authority, or is it something that dilutes authority and potentially also makes them, trying to frame this way, makes them too accessible, right? There's an air of mystique that we build, or that I build into being a power player, in that we're really clear about where we show up and how we show up so that the right message gets across. If I'm showing up all day, every day on podcasts all over the place, does that dilute me, or does that actually enhance my authority?
So is your question about your own podcast, or is it about being on podcasts generally?
That's a great question because that's my number 2.
Good night.
That's my second question.
Where do you want to start?
But this question is about, does constant exposure make consultants seem common or less exclusive, reducing the sort of pull or magnetism of their expertise? Because you can find it anywhere, you can get it anywhere. They are everywhere. So this is about showing up constantly, I guess, online.
Yeah, and I've done both, right? I've done kind of hammering content weekly, daily in some platforms, and I've then disappeared for a couple of years because I've had some really good clients and I haven't needed to. Depends on the situation. That's the first terrible answer, really, isn't it? Oh, it depends. Like, what a terrible answer. But I think it does depend on where you are and what you're trying to do. For you, though, you're trying to start something new because you've been through a few different phases and supporting other organizations and doing other things. You're trying to simplify who you are and what you do so that life's easier, because other elements of life and all of that are never straightforward when you've got a family and other stuff going on, which I'm totally with you on. So here's the danger of having your own podcast and giving it a name that, or a phrase that you've invented. So the power play thing is really exciting, and I know you're buzzed about it, but it's also, I don't know what a power player is and what kind of power player are we talking about. It's quite an open thing, but a phrase. And would you like, the worry is, would you miss the good listeners and attract the wrong kind of listeners and all of that stuff? And I think when it comes to podcasting today, and we're talking in 2025, podcasting top of funnel, if you like, as lead gen is pretty rubbish. I don't think it was always as bad as it is, but I think it's getting worse all the time because the technical barrier to making a podcast has got lower and lower. That is to say, there's software and there's bits and bobs that you can get on the internet now that didn't exist when I started podcasting that make podcasting easy, to the point where podcasting is almost as easy as having a YouTube channel. And the problem with YouTube is everyone's on there talking all sorts of shit. And it's your job and my job to find out who the good people are. So ultimately, the answer to your question is, okay, it depends, but also it doesn't really matter, because once we're inside, once we've decided to click play as a listener, there's probably a reason why we've done that. And it probably isn't because of what the podcast is called. It's probably something else. It's probably to do with the fact that, oh, I know the guest on that. I'm really excited to hear an interview with that person. Or, oh, that subject fascinates me. Or I know the host, or a combination of both. Or I've heard this person might be actually a good coach, because God knows there's loads of coaches around at the moment, right? But you've got enough of a reputation and enough of credibility just because of all the amazing things you've done, that I don't think it really matters what your podcast is called, which is why I decided to just go, okay, I'm just going to do a podcast called Not Another Business Podcast. And I didn't even look, I didn't even check. And guess what? There's loads of others with the same title. And I thought, it doesn't matter. Either people are looking for me or they're looking for things around me and they'll find the podcast. I don't really care. And some people might think that's a terrible mistake. I'm honestly not fussed. I think you're focusing on the wrong things. I think what you should be focusing on is how you're framing the conversations and the episodes that you're having and how it can help your business in the next 3 months, and then making sure that the content that you're putting out would stand the test of time in 6 months or a year if someone found it.
All right. I've got sidebar questions.
Go.
So it really doesn't, you're not bothered about having a podcast with the same name as somebody else's, some other podcast. You're happy about carving that sort of niche or that lane, setting that lane for yourself, not worried about the overlap there.
I just don't care at the moment. That could be naive, but the problem is I've had other podcasts in the past. I'll tell you the names of the podcasts I've had because you'll remember some of these, right, from back in the day. The first one that I ever had was about event planning, and that's how I discovered the power of podcasting. And that was in 2011, 2012. Bonkers.
Wow.
So that was called The Planner's Planner, and it was for event planners. It was for that, right? I went off, did loads of stuff, turned into a business consultant, and I used a tactic, and the tactic is podcasting. And so I created other podcasts. The next podcast that I personally did myself, I did loads for clients, was during COVID, and it was called Crisis Cast 2020. So not only was it about something negative, but it had a date stamp on it, which is potentially a mistake. But at the time, I wanted to flag the fact that this was it was almost like a news thing. And the way that I was framing those conversations was I was talking to my network across the world, and I was just interested in how people's perception of the pandemic was, how they were coping with it, what their thoughts were. And I don't think anyone listened to it apart from the people that were on it and the networks of those people. So you were on it, you'd post, I was on this, and you'd share it with your network and your people. And that was enough, right? Because that moment in time, which was weird for everyone, that moment in time, that podcast served me and helped me build my reputation a bit and get some clients. And then I stopped it. And then I thought, I've written a book called Narrow Podcasting. I'll do a podcast called Podcast Business Coach or something like absolutely. Who are you? I'm a podcast business coach. And the problem with that is I'm not just a podcast business coach, as ChatGPT would probably say if I typed it in. I'm so much more than that. So I felt that was too narrow. And I'm the guy that wrote a book called Narrow Podcasting, which is absolutely bonkers. So I had these things really that was driving production clients. It was like, here's the thing about podcasting. You can do this. This is what I've learned about this. Go. And there was a partnership with another tech podcasting company that they were putting my episode inside their episode. That was pretty cool. There was loads of other stuff going on. But again, I felt personally, because of all the other stuff that's happened business-wise outside of podcasting, it was time to do a broad podcast, if you like. And I decided just not another business podcast. It's fine with somebody yawning on the art because I'm trying to create a little bit of attention, of course. But the narrow bit I still stand by. It's not like I wrote a book called Narrow Podcasting. Now I don't think that's not true. But the narrow part happens later. The narrow part happens when I decide what I'm going to do with that conversation. And it might be that I speak to someone in a very similar situation to you who's thinking about starting a podcast, and I share this conversation with them because them hearing us chat will be the straw that breaks the whatever, or it'll be the final thing that they go, oh yeah, got it. So I still believe in the narrow concept, but I just don't think top of funnel in that old school way that you and I went through this. I do this for this target market thing. I think that's really great in certain cases, but with what you're trying to do with your life and what I'm trying to do with my life, I'm not sure it matters. I'd rather spend money and thought on focusing on a specific target market for a specific amount of time, right? Because I know that what I do is industry agnostic. I know that because I've done it, because I've worked in healthcare organizations and I've worked in the space industry and I'm a musician. I know the things that I teach people go across markets, but I think it's okay if I wanted to narrow focus on a particular market, I would rather have a generic podcast that spoke to people that some of whom happen to be in that market. And then I'd rather spend money, if I was going to spend money or effort on social media and specific things to say, right now I'm focused on this market and these are the things, and just go in that way, use social and paid ads and things that are more efficient for top of funnel. I'd do that. And then I wouldn't have to reposition a podcast all the time, because I think that's a bloody nightmare. And I know that because I've had to reposition a podcast loads of times. And so now I'm like, yeah, does that make sense?
That makes sense. And I'm also really with you on this idea of it being somewhat dynamic, somewhat nimble, and taking on board the results based on what you're doing in the short term, in a sense, and using that to define and refine your strategy moving forward. So when we're setting up a podcast, it's not for the next 3 years, this is the podcast. It's saying, okay, for the next 3 months, this is the podcast.
Yeah.
And then, especially for someone like me who doesn't have a podcast, who needs to strengthen her podcast chops, so to speak, firstly, that gives me hope, because I'm like, oh, I only have to think 3 months ahead rather than 3 years ahead. Secondly, I don't have to panic so much about branding in the sense of, or sort of visual branding in the sense of, okay, what it's called, because it can be what I want to call it. And again, we can refine as we go, in a sense. It's not as hard and fast as I thought it was. Whereas I've always thought you start a podcast and you have to be absolutely sure about its content, its direction, what it looks like, what it sounds like for. And yes, we need a plan. Ideally, we want structure, but also there is wiggle room in there. And I love some wiggle room, because I am hugely experimental in my work, especially in Project Power Player. So it is great to know that there is space for me to discover versus having it all figured out.
Yeah. And anyone that you've been following for a while has grown with you, right? And you've watched them grow. I think of James Schramko as being one of the first brilliant business podcast guys. And he had a podcast with somebody else. He had a podcast with Taki Moore called Sales Marketing Profit, and they just pinged case studies at each other. And at the time, this is like back in 2011 or whatever, really useful, really good. It died eventually, but it was a great thing. James also had another one with someone else who was definitely aspiring to be like James, right? So he was doing the teaching bit, and that was really good. And then he had another one called Super Fast Business, which sometimes he talked on his own, sometimes he had guests, and now he's just turned it into the James Schramko podcast, because he's done thousands of episodes. He's just rebranded to go, I'm just going to bring everything into one place and have control of it. And a few lessons there. One is co-hosts can be a bit of a nightmare, so maybe don't. But also bring regular guests back if they're offering value, and share on their feed if they have a podcast, and definitely do all of that. We can talk about that specifically, what that means if that isn't clear. And then the other thing is, yeah, you're going to grow as time. How much has the world changed in the last 5 years? Things are different, and what got you there, what got you here won't get you there. Sorry, whoever that quote's by. So I think there was another real push on, has to be every week, has to be always on. I think news is always on, but it's your business. Do what you like and do what works for you. And as soon as you're doing something that doesn't work for you, then your business owns you and you don't own your business. So we're talking about, I'm actually looking as we talk at our chat thread. Oh yeah, I found it. So I said to you, if you want to get started, I'd suggest 7 to 10 short episodes that frame out how to be a power player, right? I'm reading this verbatim. 2 or 3 of those are case studies. Easy. So we already know you've got clients. talk to them about where they were before, what the process is like working with you, and what kind of results they're seeing. That's perfect show, don't tell. That's 2 or 3 of your episodes. Underneath that line, I say basically a landing page in audio with a call to action to your offer. Short, because people don't invest amounts of money proportionate to the amount of trust you've earned, but also they invest an amount of time proportionate to the amount of trust you have earned. Put my teeth back in. If you've got a quick conversation with somebody that's 15 minutes, that is how X went from A to B to get Y result, that's all you need. That's what you would do on a landing page, and you're super pro at doing those. And then my message below says this. So framing it out, my hunch would be along the lines of short trailer, episode 1, new rules of power. Episode 2, becoming a power player. Episode 3, how guest name used X to become a power player in Y. Number 4, ethical power play. So the reason why that came in was because we know that power isn't always good power. And I know what kind of person you are. And I thought that might resonate not just with you, but with the people that you would like as clients. What are the ethics of this thing? Finding your key power play. So I'm guessing now, because I don't know enough about what you're saying a power player is, but I'm pretty sure that you're the kind of person that doesn't put everyone in one single box. And so therefore helping somebody find their starting, showing them where the start of being a power player is good. AKA like start here if you're this, start here if you're that. Episode 6, another how guest name used X to become, right? Another case study. Episode 7, where to find power when you're overwhelmed. So like when you're stuck, do this. That is really useful. Number 8, maybe I made this one up. Create power that frees. So we're having a version of this conversation anyway, because you're saying, I thought the rules of podcasting were this. And I'm basically saying they might have been then, but I think the rules are the ones that you make for yourself. But you still need to commit. You still need a plan. But you don't need a 10-year plan because they're completely pointless. You need a 3-month plan. How to avoid the wrong power path. My version of, here are some common mistakes that you might want to just let me know. And by the way, I've made them for you, so you don't have to. Number 10, what all power players know. So the last one being like the overall truth that you believe it is what makes a power player, what needs to be done. What is it? Like, what's the one thing? And if I think about athletes and I think about elite athletes, and you've spent a lot of time in that world, the difference seems to be they show up even when they don't feel 100%, right? And that's something that I know you do. And in some ways it's anecdotal, and in some ways I could say this to anyone about anything, but the point is it's coming from you to your people, and many of your people and many people around you know you and what you've done. So the message lands. When I take my kid to talk to a teacher about a challenge that he's having, I have said the exact same words to him as the teacher does. But because we're not at home and we're in a classroom and things seem to have escalated, his listening position has changed and it's more open and it's less defensive than when we're basically giving him a hard time at home around the dinner table. So it's also about the environment and the moment. And that's the critical part of this. That some people will look at you and hear you and be completely closed just because of their own internal stuff, and vice versa. And you've got to use what you've got all the time. Why wouldn't you use what you've got? So does that help?
Absolutely. That was more than generous. I'm honest. I'm like, yay, porn mini masterclass. This is amazing. All right. Next question. You
Yeah.
ready? Because this has been playing on my mind for a long time. How do you think the power dynamics shift when a consultant or, again, business owner I might work with, again, solo consultant or solo advisory-based business owner, becomes the host of a podcast versus being a guest on a podcast? So does someone hosting their own podcast give them more control and authority? Or is being a guest, so that sort of recognized transfer of power because you've been selected as a guest on a podcast, is that a better way to focus your sort of time and attention and expertise? Because one of the things that came up or has come up for me in the past, and I've talking to clients and they've said, actually, I don't think I would start a podcast because I get great traction on other people's platforms and other people's podcasts. So I guess what I'm asking is, what's the argument for starting your own podcast when ultimately you could ideally be guesting on plenty of other podcasts and pitching to guests on plenty of other podcasts, and then not have the pressure of having to run your own podcast platform? What do you think?
I do think that's a really good question, and I've heard that loads. I guest on podcasts, I don't have my own, right? And when the pandemic hit, there were loads of people that I met who were doing TV, like high profile people that were doing TV, and they would never, ever have their own podcast. It was like this sort of wannabe media thing. And then when the COVID hit, everyone started a podcast. I can't be on TV today because I can't get to the studio. So I better start my own podcast. So this is all, a lot of this is about trust. I talk to podcasters about guest selection. I also talk to podcast guests about not saying yes to every single invite that comes your way. There are at least 3 platforms that do Tinder versions of podcast guesting, where you get matched and you pitch each other and everyone shows up and does their skit and they leave and nothing. Like, if you just want access to someone's audience, if Tim Ferriss said to you, Kym, come and talk about, I'd be like, you better go and talk to Tim Ferriss because he's got a gazillion listeners. But most people don't have that. Most people don't have that. So are these people going to ask you good questions? And are you actually going to come out with something new and original? Or are you just going to basically spray them with your podcast keynote talk and cross your fingers and hope for the best? Is that worth your time? If it is, because they've got a massive audience, you go ahead, go and tell your story, go and do my journey and my struggle and how I overcame this. And now you can get my free guide at the end of it. That's how to guest on someone's podcast if you're just trying to scrape their audience. And that's quite a horrible, nasty, aggressive, blunt way of putting it, but that's what it is, right? If you have your own podcast, it's your toy and you can play with it. So I said for this podcast, I was going to interview people and ask them questions, and I was going to have people come on and ask me questions, because the way you ask me questions is better than me sitting at home and trying to write something, because I'm dealing with a person and I'm able to react and it's fun and whatever. So that's something I'm playing with, and that's something I learned from a guy called Josh Spector. So I just want to give him a shout out. He does a load of stuff with getting clients with content, and his podcast is always people come and ask me 3 questions. They get free consulting and they get access to my audience. Brilliant. Like, why wouldn't you do that? So that's cool. That stops the free strategy session. And then, so number 1, you ask people. Number 2, people ask you. Great. Number 3, you can also do the solo thing. So quick thought, this just happened. This is what I learned. Happy to share it with you, my audience. And then you're building IP on your own land. So I still think it's good to have a podcast that you own, because then you can change it and you can reposition it and you can say, oh, by the way, I've changed my mind about this and this is why. And I think that's also a really important part of growth, is having your mind changed and changing your opinion. Whereas you see it, it's disgusting in politics. They do it and it's like, you said this last year. It was like, yeah, because I didn't know that. And they bully each other over it. And it's really weird because oftentimes the right thing to do is to change your mind and to reposition. I published my book in 2022. If I had to write it again, it would be a different book. I still stand by the principles of it. But it turns out in 3 years, because of that book and the opportunities it's afforded me, like traveling all over the world and working with amazing people, I've got new opinions, I've got more expertise, and I've changed my mind about some stuff. And that's all right. So the living breathingness of it is something that I like as well, which is different to, I heard you on and you said this was the truth. It was the truth then, but I didn't know. Let's say, and here's the other thing about just being a guest is, they might keep it in the can for 6 months and then release it. And that's not that helpful to you. So I think do both, but understand that if you want control of your brand and you want to own a business or you want to grow your own business, then having your platform to sing the song that you're singing on that given day is really valuable. It's an asset. It's an asset.
Fantastic. Yes. Got it. Good. All right. Another question. You ready for another question? All right. This is a fun one.
Okay.
In your experience, do podcasts amplify genuine expertise, or do they risk creating the illusion of authority for people who haven't truly earned it?
Yeah.
How do you separate the real thought leaders from performative ones, especially if you're vetting guests as well? Like, how can we tell the difference?
Well, the answer is you do your own research and you do your own work, and you don't. When podcasts first came out and it was like, how to be a winner at the or whatever it was, people were like, oh, great. And the same with Facebook posts, and the same with humans are generally trusting and nice. So if I tell you that I can help you make $1 million in 3 weeks, that's maybe a bit of a stretch, but something that's reasonable. If I can help you make $1 million in 3 weeks, you'll probably go, probably a bullshitter. If I say I've helped my clients make over 7 figures in under 3 years, that seems more realistic. That's then where I would go, just check who my clients are. Do you want to check? How do you check? You go in all the places where you check people out. Are they on LinkedIn? How old is their business? Are people actually giving them testimonials? I even looked the other day because I was looking at investing in some marketing, some paid marketing, and I was not sure that the people who were the testimonial people were even real. And I was pressing pause on a sales video and finding the name of a person, and I couldn't find that name. And guess what? I didn't spend any money with those people. So I think it's really dangerous now, especially with AI headshots of people that don't exist. You've got to be so careful. But when you're you, Kym, you have got beyond doubt credibility that is proof that you are who you say you are because of all the work you've done. And because there are pictures that are a little bit grainy because they were taken on early digital cameras, right? Like I have, and even before digital cameras that exist that show people you are who you say you are. Plus, there's people in your orbit that will say, when it comes to X, Kym is the only person I think about. And it's just do your homework. But yeah, you're right. Because the barrier of entry is so low on press this button and publish a podcast, everyone's telling you what they think. I think honestly, age is like a really important thing. You can definitely learn things from young kids and young people. Clearly, we all do that every day because we've both got kids. But I don't want to see anecdotal success either. I don't want to see, I did this and now I'm going to tell you how to do it. That really pisses me off because I'm really happy when someone is successful at doing one thing once, but that doesn't make them a teacher. That doesn't make them a coach. That doesn't make them someone who can replicate it for someone in completely different circumstances. So that's one that you've got to be careful of because I don't think people mean to do it either. They just do it because they think, what's next? I've achieved this goal. Now I'm going to be the guru. So that's not really how it works. If I can say to you, I've worked with an astronaut, I've worked with an oncologist, and I've worked with a lawyer, X, blah, da, 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 and I've all helped them create podcasts that help grow their business. And here are the testimonials to prove it. And you can Google them. That's credibility backed up by proof. So I think when people ask you on your podcast, I'm like, probably not. Honestly, like, why? Is it going to be badly edited? Are you going to ask me interesting questions? Do I even want exposure to your audience who are a bunch of people who are delusional and broke? Like, not really.
It's remembering also that it lands on both sides of the fence, right? As you said, yes, there's your podcast and you're considering who you're inviting into your space to speak to, but also who's inviting you and doing diligence on those people as well.
Yeah.
I can't count the number of times, as you said, where I've watched something or I've looked at something and thought, those testimonials don't seem particularly authentic. And I'm like, I hammer my clients to say, if you're don't, because I think a lot of people just throw it away because they use the template on the landing page or the website that says generic photographs, first name, last name, initial. Here's the kind of amazing result. And listen, if you have a testimonial, I'm going to need everything from that person, right? I need their name. I need their position. I need their company or their organization. I need all this information. I need to put online. And ideally, when you publish it, I need a link to find them as well. Anything less, and you've got me going, nope, that's not real. Especially now you can invent, because there was once a time where there was a limited amount of stock images that you could use to fill those little picture frames. But now AI can generate brand new people that Google has never seen before, and we can't reverse image search them. So now more than ever, I think people are tempted to maybe fabricate a little bit. And I'm like, no.
Okay, so what's next? What's your next question? What's been most useful about this conversation?
The most helpful thing about this conversation is the reminder that podcasting, like every other publishing opportunity, is a living and breathing entity that will grow and will change. And you don't have to have it all figured out to get started. And while we're here comparing our day one to the huge podcasters' day 7,000, thinking, oh, I couldn't release a podcast because it doesn't sound or look anything like theirs. Actually, you've got to get started. And that's a big hurdle. Just recording your first episode, I would imagine, I have to do it. But recording your first episode is that first hurdle. You just need to do it. Just do it, right? And then move from there. Versus, as I said, having it all figured out and then knowing that you said something really interesting. And then the platform then becomes your toy, right? It's your football. You get to decide when you take it home.
Yeah.
And so that was a really powerful piece, because actually you realize that there's so much more within your control than you realize. Feels like podcasting is a very uncontrollable kind of sport in a sense, but actually you don't even need to curate to the nth degree. You can record, you can say the thing that's most present or prominent on your mind. And as you said, 6 months down the line, you can say, I know I said that before, but actually here's what I just experienced, and it's reframed my thinking on this, and this is how, and this is why. And I think those sorts of podcasts are the most powerful. Those insights into people's minds are the most powerful. I love listening to people who change their mind. I love understanding what has helped them to change their mind, what has shifted their perspective, the experiences they've had that made them see things in a new way. That for me is the interesting stuff, not necessarily just the expertise. This is what I know. This is what I can prove. It's okay. You have this expertise. How is it growing? How is it changing? What does it mean now? And so personally, that's the sort of thing I love hearing from others, but I'd forgotten that potentially people might enjoy hearing that from me too.
Of course. The other person that I will name, thanks for sharing that. I really appreciate it. You're saying things. I'm like, oh yeah, and that's because that's what happens. I just Googled when Mark Maron started his WTF podcast. Do you know about that podcast?
Yes.
So he's a comedian. He started his podcast in September 2009. And I've listened to loads of those. I started at about episode 90, which was quite early on because he does 2 a week. And he's just a comedian, working comedian, recording people in his garage. And it got a following. And Robin Williams was on it talking about depression, which was incredible. And eventually Barack Obama showed up at his house, and it was like this incredible thing. So he grew that, and his podcast is his business, and we're not really talking about that. But what it does bring to mind when you talk about that is when you dip in and out of that, and I don't listen all the time, but I've listened over the years. During that time, since 2009, it's 2025, right? Since 2009, you also hear him go through relationships, breakups, the death of a partner, a house move, like all of these things. Clearly his mind has changed on loads of things because he's lived that amount of life. And you and I met quite a few years ago. There's no question our perception of each other has changed. There's no question of the fact our minds have changed about loads of things in business. And that's totally cool. So why wouldn't you want to share that with people who can then say, okay, look, Toby's not claiming to have said what got you here won't get you there, but someone might for the first time hear that phrase from my mouth and go, oh, that's cool. I haven't heard that one before. And that's valuable.
Yeah.
It doesn't always have to be your thought leadership. It can be, I'm a little bit older than you, or I've done different things to you while you were over there being cool at that thing. I was working out this, and here's what I learned from these people. And if I can remember their names, I'll credit them. Boom. Which is why I'll credit James Schramko and why I'll credit Mark Maron. Because James Schramko and Mark Maron don't want my clients. They've got their own, they've got their own thing going on. So what that also does is it backs up that I'm someone who does my homework and I know the genre. And the final point is with podcasting, people still can't agree what the definition of a podcast is. So if we're there, then you're more than entitled to do what the hell you want with yours.
I love it. I love it. It's so funny because when I am coaching my clients, our process together when we work together privately is very much that sort of experimental setup. So yes, there's a framework of sorts, but as you said before, we can't put people in boxes, and we get the best results out of our clients when we pay attention to who they are and, you know, where they've come from as a unique piece of their puzzle, right? So we're not lobbing them all in the same box. And so I am very open with them as I coach them about how over the next 3 months, we're going to work on this, and then we're going to assess results, right? We're going to look at what we've achieved during that time and what we've learned, and then amend or edit or reposition our strategy accordingly, because We have to learn that way. Sometimes it's not even 3 months. Sometimes it can be 3 days. It can be like, all right, what did we learn during the last 72 hours? This is going to change how we move forward. And I feel great about doing that because I know I get great results about doing that. It just hadn't occurred to me that maybe I had permission to do that on a more public platform, in a more public arena versus just me and my client where we are. And it hadn't occurred to me necessarily that I could potentially get great results by being open, or rather showing my work. And so maybe I should do a podcast called Showing My Work, which essentially is show you working out. But yeah, anyway.
But we can get married to, I think the thing that I'm aware of is we can get married to certain phrases, and then that can stop us from doing anything about it. Because we're like, oh, but it doesn't fit in that box of power player or showing my work or not another business. Like, whatever, just get on with it. Just get on with it and start. Obviously, the classic tip. Secondly, that thing about agreements. Like, I don't think Mark Maron's upset that I haven't heard one of his episodes for a year or so. I don't think he cares. And that's okay as well. People will join you at any time during the journey. So I think when I say the journey, I'm talking about making your podcast. I'm not trying to use that one. I hate that word. But people will join any time. So I think if you're starting because you're in business, you want that first 10 episodes to be real signposts of those various things. If you think back to, there's case studies, there's what is this thing? What happens when I'm stuck? Like those, basically it's an FAQs page on your website, but there are testimonials that are live because they're conversations. If you start there and you got 7 to 10 of those, boom, you've got through all the technical stuff, you've got through all the recording problems or challenges, you've worked out what part of the process you're going to do, you've worked out if you're going to delegate audio editing to people, or if you can do it yourself, or if your team can do it. Like all of those things you've done, which is exactly, again, the same as you. I work with people for 3 months with an outcome, which is 10 episodes of your podcast positioned to help your business where it is today. And in 3 months' time, if you want to continue with me and my help and or my production team, we'll go from there. But frankly, I don't want to sign up to work with you for a year because I don't know if it's going to work out that well. What I know is I can deliver this if you promise to show up for me in 3 months. And in 3 months, we'll both have a sense of if this works and if we want to carry on hanging out together because we're having fun and making money. Otherwise, why would we do that? So having fun and making money is another podcast you can do.
We talked about how progression and publishing progression is quite important, right? Showing people how you've grown in terms of your business and your ideas and how you do what you do. Now, it's called Project Power Player because it is experimental. And a huge part of Project Power Player's foundation is this bunch of sort of ideas I have around power dynamics, what they mean in certain contexts, what they mean in business, personal context, whatever it is, right? And I think I'm on idea number 51 now. So I've got these 51 thoughts in my mind of what I think or what I believe about power right now based on who I am right now in 2025. I'm wondering if they are a good fit for podcast and audio content, i.e. just sharing my ideas and then potentially saying to my audience, what do you think? Or change my mind, or give me your perspective, to create that conversation. My question is, does that work in podcast form? i.e. can I create dialogue via podcast to have people communicate with me? Or is it better to keep that maybe in blog where they can respond in comments and have podcasts as more sort of an overarching?
So point number one, you can't turn a blog into a podcast, but you can turn a podcast into a blog. It's much easier to do it that way because transcribe, auto, whatever. So that's the most efficient way. The second question I have for you is give me one simple line of one of those 51 or two things. Like, give me one law or one method or theory or however you're framing it. Just give me one.
Here we go. This one's a good one, right? I talk about the power of error, which is so related to what we're talking about. And the fact that I feel a lot of people in these consulting industries manufacture their vulnerability, right? They sort of calculate their oopsies in order to create power, in a sense, when actually it's not genuine, right? It's not authentic and it's not right. I don't believe that that is the way we connect with our audience, especially if we're going to be vulnerable. Manipulating in that sense, I hate it. I hate when I receive an email saying, oh, sorry, forgot the link. It's another opportunity. It drives me up the wall.
Ah.
And yet it is taught consistently by sales gurus or whatever to kind of just string your audience along. I hate it. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. No, I've got 50 other ideas like that.
Okay, so I was fine, by the way, when you said Zoom was updating and you'd be late. I just want to put that out there. Second of all, your belief is that people manufacture vulnerability. I'm inclined to agree with that as well. So, podcast episode title is, are you manufacturing your vulnerability? Quite challenging. Alternative one, do we manufacture our vulnerability to get clients, right? Again, sharing the sharing the responsibility rather than saying, are you doing that? 3 signs that your next hire is manufacturing their vulnerability to get attention and will make a shitty employee. Like, so there's so many versions of that because it's a great point. And there's a massive trend. My friend Rachel's a really good copywriter, and she talked about, like, well, it used to be people with their hair blowing in the wind and their photos on a bike, and now it's people crying on LinkedIn, like people in tears on LinkedIn. So yeah, I think that that's one you can play with in loads of different ways. So you can do that as a solo episode. You can say, these are my thoughts. This is why I've come to this thought, and this is how I spot that shit. Just to be aware, you might see it, you might disagree, but if this resonated with you, come say hi on my website.com. The end, right? That's a solo episode version. The other version of that is with a guest who either agrees with you and has additional experience and that can build on that belief as a case in point, or somebody who disagrees with you and talks about being authentic and why that's important and blah 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 blah. And you can have a, you know, bit of discourse and it'll be cool, right? But maybe you'll change your mind, or maybe you'll say, oh, okay, yeah, it's more nuanced than that. And going back to what we talked about before, was it's okay to change your mind. You said, are we manufacturing our vulnerability? Change my mind. Like, I think we are. Change my mind. Well, here you go. Here's someone who came on and changed my mind about that. In this case, yes. In these cases, actually, maybe not. And this is why it's important. And we've got to be careful, especially when it comes to young people. Really careful. So, yeah, it's nuanced, isn't it? But it's a good bit of clickbait. Equally, and
Clickbait.
here's another here's another really important thing that ties back to the front and the end, and what you just said. One of the first things I said to you was, I think podcasts are shitty lead generation tools. They're shitty top of funnel things. What they are, though, are excellent relationship builders and all that other stuff. In this case, how I would use that particular podcast, again, would be to send it to somebody. I think in my book, I call it prescription pod, where you write a prescription. I've had loads of clients do this. Mark Silverman's got like 700 and something podcast episodes. And one of the things I taught him to do was take that episode, he'll do a really good solo episode about an opinion, a belief, something. Great. 10 minutes, really short, really sharp. And then he'll bank it. And I'll always say, who needs to hear that from you now? Who's in your pipeline? Who in your pipeline needs to hear that about vulnerability? Who in your pipeline needs to hear that about branding or about anything, whatever? It doesn't matter. Who needs to hear that? Because yeah, put it out, and yeah, put it out on your socials, announce it on your socials so people come and people just go do all that shit. But also go to that network of people who are in your life right now and say, ha. And then what will happen is you'll look at the network of people you're building on your dashboard of connections and contacts, or however you manage your stuff, and keep asking yourself, what does that person need next? Not, that person needs a podcast. Maybe I'll pitch them a podcast. My thing is like, does that person seems to have a problem with being on camera. Here's an episode about doing podcasts without having a camera on that I've just created, or I created 3 months ago, and you reminded me of that, and here it is, boom. So you're then you're away from your office and you're slowly building trust because you're listening to them. And the problem with solo podcasts is you're not listening to anyone. So you have to then take them and say, I listened to you and you inspired this. So many things you've said could inspire me to do 20 solo episodes, and we've been talking for over an hour. But they're in there now, they're recorded, so I may or may not chop this up.
Yes, yes, yes.
Cool. Thanks, Kym.
Thanks for having my bonus question.
Thanks for checking out this episode. If you enjoyed it, please follow the podcast so you don't miss what's coming next. You can leave a kind review as it helps the podcast get found. You can find Kym over at powerplayerclub.com and also on LinkedIn. More about all the ways I can help you have conversations to attract and retain ideal clients, create powerful referrers, and find top talent. You'll find all of that over at narrowpodcasting.com.